Good afternoon to you. Well, as you deal with perhaps no water and no electricity all at the same time, Cabinet is in its annual Lokotla to prepare for the President's State of the Nation address. So many questions around whether government can lead an effort to reform to fix the problems that we have at the moment. There's load shedding. The ANC has claimed many times it will renew itself. The President himself has said he wants to implement structural reform. But there are many people who now believe President Cyril Ramaphosa will not lead any process of reform. And Bernstein is the Executive Director at the Centre for Development Enterprise. And good afternoon to you. You suggested that President Ramaphosa is no longer a credible reformer. Why do you say that?
Well, Stephen, he's been the president for 5 years now. And year after year, we get a State of the Nation speech and many other speeches. But our problems seem to keep getting worse. And in my view, the President has introduced a few reforms. We need to be fair. They're generally not fundamental enough. They're implemented at glacial speed, and it's just not sufficient for the South African mix of crises. So I don't think there is sufficient political will or courage to deal with the many challenges that face South Africa today.
There's been so much discussion about this. I mean, is the problem within the ANC, people who want the President to do things always sort of, in the end, blame his party?
I'm arguing that we need to be honest about why we are in such a mess in South Africa today. I think, firstly, we have had some bad policies, from cadre deployment to an inadequate commitment to markets and the power of private entrepreneurs, and a belief that in one breath you can say we have a failed state or a very weak state and riddled with corruption, but in the next breath you say that this very state must lead reform. It's not credible. So one problem, one cause of our troubles is bad policy. The second cause of our troubles is, I think, a failed strategy. The President has said, I have to keep the ANC united at all costs. I don't buy that. I think it's failed. Because of that strategy, he knew there were people in his security establishment in 2018 who were, I don't know the right word, let's call them traitors, not committed to the Constitution or to peace or his presidency. And even after 2021 and a failed insurrection and his own panel report, we've yet to see anyone senior charged or subject to disciplinary action. That is a consequence of not wanting to break up the ANC. He has people in his cabinet who are incompetent to do the job. There are allegations of corruption against many people, but they remain. So that's the second cause of our troubles, a very bad strategy which has failed. The needs of the country are much greater than unifying the ANC. And then thirdly, I don't think we're seeing a leader who learns from experience. We kind of get eloquent descriptions of what is wrong with South Africa and how we're failing on this front or that front. But we keep getting told the same old prescriptions of what to do. It's time for a very different approach to moving out of the hole that we're digging on so many fronts and getting the country back on track.
A lot of people might, I suppose, blame the fact that he had opposition in the ANC. They might blame COVID-19. I mean, wouldn't that be fair to say that the pandemic would certainly have slowed any reform?
Look, the pandemic definitely slowed reform and how we dealt with it. And yes, there is opposition. And yes, we had centuries of discrimination and 48 years of apartheid. All true. But I don't think there's anything inevitable about where we are today. I think an approach which talks good, we're going to have summits, we're going to have task teams, we're going to do this, we're going to do that, just never translates into effective action. Think about it. I think it was late July, early August, we have an emergency energy plan. There are no deadlines. It's very unclear who's accountable. And then here we are again in January. The president cancels his trip to Davos because of the energy crisis. Have we made real progress? I don't think so. You're either in favor of a market to provide energy, which is what a lot of other countries who had crises have gone for. Chile, for example, there's a very effective market for energy with lots of different private sector providers. Or you don't. But South Africa hovers between this and that, and the bottom line is we never get anywhere. I also think a leader who does not support the CEO of Eskom when he's accused of treason is just, what kind of leader is that?
Sure. Ramaphosa said 6 years ago, so in 2017, when he was running for the leadership of the ANC, he said he wanted to have a social compact involving business, government and labour. And perhaps the strongest criticism one could make of the president, if one wished to be critical, would be on this. 6 years ago he made the promise, and we just don't have it. However, if one wanted to then explain why that didn't happen, the answer might go like this, that our country is too divided, that business and labour, maybe government, are too divided. The divisions in our society run too deep for anyone to sort of do anything. Could that be the problem? I hear your criticism of the president. I'm not going to argue with you about it. But could it also be that our society is, unfortunately, just too divided?
Stephen, I'm not saying this is easy or that running South Africa is easy. But in my view, in a democracy, we elect people to govern. And to govern is to choose. It's not to be elected and then say, oh, I'm not going to make any decisions. I'm going to consult this one and that one. I think a compact, a grand compact, was a very bad idea. It's not the right way to run South Africa. Firstly, you have to say who is in the room when we're setting up such a compact. It's big business, big labor, and big government, national government. Think of who is not in that room. The unemployed, the cities, smaller firms or new firms. So I don't think this is a way to run South Africa. So that's the first issue. The second issue is a compact requires some negotiation. It's not the government coming along and saying everybody sign on the dotted line to what we're going to do. And if you keep avoiding the big issues that hold us back, that investors keep telling us hold us back, you're never going to make any progress. So I think a social compact was the wrong approach. I think leaders in a democracy must lead. I think they have to make choices, sometimes hard, difficult choices that disrupt the status quo. But when you live in a country where over 50% of the population lives in poverty and we have one of the world-beating unemployment records, you have to make some new decisions. And to think that repeating the same old policies, perhaps with new Christmas wrapping, is going to get South Africa out of trouble, well, we're deeper in trouble now, in many respects, than we've ever been in the last 5 years.
What kind of reforms do you think would make a difference? What for you would need to be done urgently?
There are a lot of things. I think we need really excellent people in our cabinet. That's one issue. Not just the cabinet, but the top officials. And I think we need a philosophy of change. This country needs change if we're going to get people out of poverty. What is the president's philosophy? Mine is clear. I think we need an effective state that concentrates on doing the basics, and I would free up the market, which is one of the few areas with capacity as the state collapses around us. I would free up the market and entrepreneurs to do as much as they possibly can within reasonable regulations. So I don't think we have a philosophy of change. We want a developmental state, but we don't have an effective state at all. We want to open up Transnet rail lines to the private sector, but we've got all sorts of conditions. Only for 2 years, you have to do this, you have to accept that. This is a failure to understand how markets and capital work. So I think we need a new philosophy of how to change South Africa, how to build an inclusive society, how to stop the kind of failures where we're failing to manage urbanization. We're nearly 70% urbanized, and you drive around our cities and they're just more and more sprawl and people living in terrible circumstances, far from economic opportunity. I could go on, but to keep doing what we're doing is not going to help. I think we have to stop cadre deployment. We need people in a modern South Africa, sophisticated country, who know how to run big systems. It's as simple as that. It's quite clear. Anybody looking at this country from afar, from out of space, would have to say, gee, whoever's running this place doesn't know what they're doing. Everything is falling apart.
Bernstein, thank you, Executive Director at the Centre for Development Enterprise.